All right, good morning again, everyone. It is truly a privilege to welcome you to this important and timely conversation, Breaking Barriers, Advocating for Learners with Diverse Needs. My name is Zanella Claxton, and I am a proud citizen of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I currently serve as the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Library Services, Information Technology, Youth and Sports in the Nevis Island Administration. And I'm also currently conducting research focused on leadership and inclusion. You know, there's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. But what happens when that village has walls? When the paths are uneven, the doors are locked, and some children are left standing on the outside? Today, we are here to talk about tearing down those walls, brick by brick, barrier by barrier. Breaking barriers is not just about changing policies. It's about transforming mindsets, seeing beyond disability, beyond difference, and recognizing the dignity and worth of every learner. This isn't just another panel discussion, so good choice remaining with us. This is a conversation that matters, one that could change the trajectory of a child's life, reshape a classroom, or even transform an entire education system. So as we engage today, I invite you, parents, teachers, leaders, to reflect on how you can help to break barriers in your own circle of influence. And we are very fortunate today to be joined by three extraordinary individuals who don't just talk about inclusion. They've dedicated their lives to making it a reality. We begin with Ms. Sharika Bentham, a speech and language therapist with over 15 years' experience, who knows that communication is the bridge between isolation and connection. She is recognized for her expertise in communication disorders, a graduate of the University of Auckland and the University of the West Indies, and founder and director of Easy Speak Enterprises, a private practice in Barbados. Ms. Bentham leads a dedicated team offering evidence-based interventions for children with communication challenges. She also contributes to capacity building as a lecturer in speech therapy, a clinical supervisor, and a mentor for emerging therapists from universities worldwide. Let's give her a round of applause. Our second panelist, Dr. Lyndon Lashley, is a leading voice in special and inclusive education across the Caribbean with over 2 decades of experience. He's a senior lecturer, the Department of Foundation and Education Management, and an immediate past assistant dean in the Faculty of Education and Humanities, University of Guyana. Dr. Lashley is currently the director of the University of Guyana's Early Childhood Center of Excellence and the chairman of the University of Guyana's Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity Task Force. A Commonwealth PhD scholar, he has co-created the mock teaching model now used to prepare future teachers and co-led the development of the university's Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity policy. Dr. Lashley doesn't just write policies. He designs frameworks like the Southern Inclusion Framework and the Inclusive Education Checker, which provide practical tools for assessing inclusion. He's also a published author, course reviewer, and course developer. Dr. Lashley's philosophy is that inclusion begins in the heart before it is written into policy, a principle reflected in every facet of his work. Dr. Joan Spencer Hernandez is the Managing Director of Reimagining Solutions for Education. She is a former senior lecturer at UWI, Mona, and manager of the Joint Board of Teacher Education. She led quality assurance and certification for teachers across Jamaica, Belize, the Cayman Islands, and Turks and Caicos. As testing and measurement specialist at the Caribbean Center of Excellence for Teacher Training, she developed the region's first reading standards test for 8 Caribbean countries, grounded in the Caribbean Standards for Reading and Writing, which she authored. A prolific publisher, her work focuses on student achievement, special education needs, and factors impacting teachers and student performance. She founded the School of Education Center for Assessment and Treatment of Exceptionalities, UEMONA. Her Caribbean consultancy spans multiple ministries and funding through regional and international bodies, emphasizing inclusive and special education and curriculum development. And she received the Prime Minister's Medal of Appreciation for Service in Education in 2013. Dr. Hernandez continues to advocate for data-informed inclusion, showing that equity and excellence must walk hand in hand if we are to reach every learner. Together, these three leaders, Mrs. Bentham, Dr. Lashley, and Dr. Spencer Hernandez, represent a continuum of advocacy. And now we welcome Ms. Bentham to do her presentation, and she'll be followed directly by Dr. Lashley and then Dr. Spencer Hernandez.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am very, very glad to see all of you here because it shows that you are interested and inspired to help create some sort of change. I bring a practical, on-the-ground perspective because I work with many children with diverse needs. The majority of my caseload is on the autistic spectrum, and that's primarily who I see. If you can move to the first slide for me, I want to show you a picture of quite a few who I see. And we've all put them into, next slide, we've all put them into Tommy. So we have Tommy who has a diagnosis of ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. He is most likely on a 3-year wait list to see a government speech therapist, and we may go, in Barbados, that's so long, whereas there's some of the countries that do not have any access to see a speech therapist, government or otherwise. Teachers aren't sure how to teach him because he's so difficult. He spends most of the day in the principal's office where he's not getting access to learning because he's disrupting the class, and we hear that a lot. With our children with diverse needs, they come with a lot of behavioral challenges and they're disruptive to the classroom environment. Mom has been told that she has to find an aide for him, or an educational aide for him, or find a school that's a better fit for him. And this is something that I hear daily, especially around this time when children are now transitioning into a new school, and they're having a lot of those challenges with fitting into the new setting. Across classrooms, too many children are still excluded, misunderstood, or under-supported. They do not have access to the services that they need to become exceptional learners. We see all of these things about Tommy, but what haven't we heard about Tommy? That Tommy is 3 years old and he can count to 200, that he can read books because of his hyperlexia. He can read books at a grade 2, grade 3, or upwards level. Yes, he doesn't have that functional communication, but he can list off the names of all the dinosaurs or all the planets or whatever, and we haven't zoomed in on that. What we hear from the school or the educational setting is that Tommy's trouble. This boy is real trouble boy. I don't know how he can be in this class. He can disrupt the class. He can run outside the class. So, what does breaking barriers do then? Breaking barriers removes the obstacles that prevent learners from accessing quality education. How did we do that? We look at what the challenges are. We have stigma. There's some children that I have to tell the parents, please don't tell the school that he has ASD because they're going to say no. They're not going to accept him because they're going to say, oh, we don't do that. We're not a special needs school. That's what I hear all the time. We're not a special needs school. We don't know how to cater to kids with special needs. When there is this whole thing of inclusion, we're talking inclusion at the top, But when we get into the actual practical setting of the school, of the classroom, it's not for here. He's not for here. Yes. Access to resources, the therapists, the aides. Everybody cannot afford an aide. An aide you have to pay a full salary to every month to support your child in the class. And most of these people, these parents are already paying for private school because they need a small classroom setting or the small specialized setting. And on top of that, they have to pay an aide a salary every month. So resources are drained. There are teacher training gaps to adequately support inclusive practices. I speak to teachers, I do teacher training, and the first thing the teachers say is, we need help. We need support. There's so many teachers that want to, but they need the adequate training. They need the adequate resources. They need the adequate support to be able to support our learners. Yeah? They need support too. They need help too. Then we have our systemic barriers. I don't know if it's the same throughout the Caribbean, but we are so 11 plus focused. We're very focused on the common entrance examination. How are we going to get through? And we're focused on the English and math, and they have to be exceptional for the 11 plus. And then what happens? And what happens is that our children fall through the cracks because our teachers are so focused on getting these high marks and these good grades so that they can be on the news when the 11 plus comes out. So we still have a very, very rigid curriculum that doesn't give leeway for IEP adaptability. So we want to be able to have an individualized plan for our children, but we need to make changes within our curriculum development and break away. It's a big paradigm shift in education to be able to support good, actionable IEPs, because an IEP is just a document. Action in it is where our child gets support. How do we do this? What are some of our strategies? Collaboration. We need it. We need our specialists, whether it be speech therapists, psychologists, behavioral therapists, being able to have moments like these where we can come together and speak with parents, with educations, with governments, with NGOs, so that we can have practical decision making, which can be actionable from tomorrow within the classroom setting, within the educational setting. We need parent and family support, helping families navigate school systems, because a lot of them do not know what is accessible to them, what their rights are, what their children's rights are. I say you can't tell the child don't come back to school, because your child has a right to education. So we need to support our parents to be able to navigate these school systems, request services, push for accommodations for their children. We need educational aids within the classroom system that the parents don't have to pay for. Advocate for their children and know the awareness of their support systems. We need flexibility all throughout the educational system so that we can have adaptive curriculums and see these IEPs in action. And as I said, we need further teacher training and support within the classrooms because we understand the plight of the teachers, and that will change when we have more people in the classroom to support children. That way, the teacher can get the job done more efficiently. Then we talk about putting paper to practice. What does the inclusive education system or that inclusive classroom system look like off paper? Because a lot of these policies look amazing on paper, but how do we action it? How do we actually put it into practice so that we can achieve equitable access for learners? And when we think about advocacy, I want to highlight that advocacy is collective. When we partner, and that's a big piece, when we partner and bring our ideas together, because I'm sure all of you in this room have great ideas for change, but when we bring our ideas together, systems shift. Inclusion, and this is by George Diane Education, I love this. Inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space, a better space for everyone. And for too long, inclusion has been framed as simply accepting. We're accepting these children. We're letting them into our classrooms. We're accepting exceptional learners into spaces that weren't designed for them in the first place. So let's instead think about how we can reconfigure our spaces so that all learners truly belong and can actually shape how that space works. That is the way how we break barriers. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So when we think about having a space where all children can have their potentials realized and when all children can participate, be fully engaged and have the opportunities that are necessary for them to develop, for them to achieve, and for them to excel, we often think it's a space that must be created from what is already written and documented, and not a space that they can help to create and shape to make their learning experience better. The University of Guyana Early Childhood Center of Excellence is a CDB project that started in 2021. But before that, it was a 10-year-old dream. Now, when the center started, we had about 34 children who had some form of neurodivergence or some form of impairment. And the practice, we utilized theories and principles that existed previously that weren't actually conceptualized or contextualized to the needs of these children. But we try to adopt and tailor these to meet the needs of the children. But we sat one day and we considered, what about creating our own for the children as the population of neurodivergent children grew? Because there were certain things that were there. There are certain sociocultural specificities to the Caribbean and to Guyana that are not considered in theories. But yet, year after year, we explore these theories, we try to adopt them, we try to implement them, and yet still year after year, we have a group of children who are already marginalized, who are already excluded, who are already facing forms of discrimination and stigmatization, even to the extent of depersonalization, being placed into a sphere, into a metasphere, into a physical learning environment by these external principles, processes, and practices. Now, everything I'm about to say to you has been researched and documented by the Early Childhood Center at the University of Guyana, and you can access it at that link, or you can access it through those books. Now, how do we cater for children who are neurodivergent, who have various forms of impairment, and whose needs are often unrecognized and unmet? So let's start with sociocultural pedagogies. What is that? Pedagogies that are Caribbeanly organized, Caribbean created, Caribbean culturally embedded, and Caribbean resourced. So these are pedagogies, are teaching approaches that our teachers in the classroom, or teacher aides, or support, or principals, or practitioners are going to utilize in the classroom to ensure our children's needs are met. And sociocultural pedagogies are something we've been using sometimes as we innovate, as we practice, and as we implement. But then sometimes we haven't taken them into the depth to understand how they meet the various challenges the children have in the classroom and in the learning environment, in the physical environment, sometimes out of the school. So when we talk about sociocultural pedagogies at the University of Guyana Early Childhood Center of Excellence, we talk of pedagogies that take, for instance, the culture of the children. So in a typical classroom of about 15 children, we have about 8 to 9 children who are either from migrant background, indigenous background, have some sort of intellectual disability or some other form of impairment. And they are coming with various forms of different cultural identities, different expectations from parental capitals, parental inheritance, and legacies of earlier socialization that oftentimes were challenging for them. So when you organize a pedagogical approach, like the first speaker before me said, making the individualized education plan more contextualized for that child, you have to utilize sociocultural pedagogies, and you can explore that more in depth on the website. Now, when we talk about community of practices within the Early Childhood Center of Excellence, we have community of practices in which we have teachers and parents working together on a plan that was already implemented by the school's administration. So this community of practice will include the parent of the child or the guardian, the teacher, but also the specialist in that field. And the specialist in that field can come from any part of the community, or for us, the university's setting. And that person is somebody who understands that particular impairment or disability, whether it's autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, intellectual disability, and that person is steering that community of practice for that particular group of children always. So these persons are influencing their learning experiences, influencing their socialization, and having these children's needs met directly and at the very depth of individualized attention. So when we talk about removing historical legacies, competing approach, and embracing distinct sociocultural elements, we're talking about the things that makes our children Caribbean children. But because they are classified as differently able or having impairments or disability, we tend to neglect the capital they come with. Because there's one thing we must not forget. Even if a child has an impairment, the child has a capital of skills, of knowledge, of understanding about their experiences and what worked for them, and about what can enhance those experiences. And if we are to truly engage them and have their needs met, we must first understand those. And we can only understand those fully if we remove the preconceived notions we have in our minds and in our practices as education as to what will meet their need, without actually considering the engagement of the legacies of challenges, of exclusion that they face, and the capital of resilience, the inheritance and skills that they had to use to overcome those before they actually get to a point in which you are giving them support. Organic theoretical underpinning. As was said in the introduction, we have our own organic theory for the children with special needs in Guyana. And we did this because too often the social model of disability, the social ecological model, all the models that are implemented and are used to shape practice were designed outside of the Caribbean. So why not have our own that actually considers our legacy, our colonial past, our legacies of intertribal discourse within our indigenous groups, our different experiences as a multicultural society that has not been considered in any of the theories abroad. And if you utilize those, you have an understanding that is actually shaped for action for a specific group of children in the Caribbean, in Guyana, in the wider global South. And you have the Southern Inclusion Theory already in practice in Guyana for the last 3 years. Caribbean pedagogues' emergence. Many of our pedagogues, whether they work at the University of the West Indies, the University of Guyana, or any of the universities across the Caribbean, aren't trained or haven't reinvented a pedagogical approach or a theoretical understanding that is geared towards Caribbean learners. What they have done is an excellent job of contextualizing those existing pedagogies to match what we think is suiting our children. But we are creating an emergence of Caribbean pedagogues who are creating pedagogies from the different country settings, the different understanding of what works for children with disabilities in those contexts. And when our student panels were sharing their views, you get an understanding that they are crying out for that as well at the secondary level, because this is only done at the early childhood level thus far at the University of Guyana. And what we are doing as well is in our teacher education program, we are reshaping what we teach our teachers who are going to be encountering children with special education needs and different forms of disabilities in their classroom. So we are teaching them culturally responsive pedagogical approaches. And when we do this, we recognize that this isn't static. So when the teachers go into the institutions for practicum, the practicum has a whole new approach in terms of what is culturally specific to that particular area in which the school is situated and the children with impairment who make up the population of that school. It may sound like a lot, but with commitment and practice, we do get it done quite easily. So this session of the discourse is, how do we break barriers? While I've given you a lot of things to think about in terms of breaking barriers, in terms of practice and approach, remember this. Advocating for learners with diverse needs require Caribbean and Global South movements towards inclusion and neurodiversity while confronting local realities. What are the local realities? You understand them best within your local area of practice in your school. So let me give you an example. In the area in which the University of Guyana's Early Childhood Center is, the setting comprised of impoverished backgrounds, very poor backgrounds, pockets of migrants committee from Haiti and from Venezuela, and it also consists of a very neighboring community of affluent persons who are academics, politicians, and so forth. These groups of children come together in the one sphere to learn, to socialize, but within that space, there's pockets of groups that reflects elitism, reflects ableism, reflects social stratification within the classroom that sometimes the average teacher does not even recognize unless you point it out to them. And starting the discourse at that level is critical. So that's why we're talking about confronting local realities of systemic inequalities. Because if this continues, we will have this inequality being replicated and continued forever in our education system. Then we talk about limited resource. And we're not talking about resources limitation in terms of procurement and buying, but we're talking about resource limitation in terms of what the child culturally understands. So let me give you an example. I have a 10-year-old, and he likes to create anime to play and to do graphic design. So one day I was there, and I'm trying to get him to come outside to play cricket. So I'm giving the father's explanation of why cricket is important. And he said, "Look, Dr. Lashley, listen." And his mother turned and said, "Who are you calling Dr. Lashley? That's your father." I said, "Daddy." He said, "Dr. Lashley, listen." So I listened. He said, "This is my interest. I have learned your interest. I've been a good son. I do what you want. This is my interest. Can you learn this?" In that moment, as a practitioner, I said, "Okay, let me try it for a bit." And I was bad at it. And he laughed at me for a few days. But then I got good at it. And he invited me into his sphere. And now I play anime competition with many 10-year-olds across the world. What this has done is that it's opened my understanding to what my 10-year-old can do, who he's interacting with. And then what I did is I transferred this to the Early Childhood Center of Excellence as a part of the parents' community of practice. And now they're getting to understand what their children are doing, what their children understand, how the children see them, and not see everything as a clash between generations of learners, even though there's impairments, challenges, and barriers between them, but as an opening of sphere in which parent, child, and practitioner can work. And that's one of the greatest parts of breaking barriers. I noticed Nella's here. So to end it, I want you to remember this. We are a unique sociocultural sphere. Our children with impairment present a unique form of those impairment. And one of those unique forms of those impairment is some pseudo-presentations of them because we force certain things on them. Rethink and be socially, culturally relevant to your children.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm going to try to work with this 10 minutes. Never did it before, so here we go. Okay, so we're looking at understanding the challenges and the barriers that our students or young people have. They extend beyond the traditional kind of disabilities that we're very aware of, and we had our young lady here speaking very eloquently about her struggles with dyslexia. What would the world be today without E equals MC squared? No, I'm not a physicist, but that is Einstein, who didn't learn to read until he was 9 years old because his mom listen parents, his mom insisted, nothing is wrong with my child. And so because she pressured the system, he learned to read. And we have many, many examples throughout history, even right here in the Caribbean. All right, so we're looking at vulnerable students, which includes really our students with special needs. We also look at cultural differences, language differences. For example, in Belize, you speak 8 different languages. What's the foundation there? Some of the children have difficulties as a result of the language of school is English. And so they bring the challenges. Dominica, with French Creole. We look at St. Lucia also. And all of us in Jamaica, we have our own Creole that is supposedly English-based, but a lot of African words are there. So when you tell a child, you speak to a child in a particular language and he or she doesn't understand, immediately we start to think something is wrong with that child. Yes? We look at the Bahamas, for example, with all your sister islands, so many of them. So some of them are crying out, we don't get the same services as the main island, yes? And so we have different reasons why some of our children struggle. Or indigenous populations in the various countries that still have indigenous populations. They cry out too. Our children below the poverty line, they have real issues. So we also speak about limited resources. That's one of the barriers we talk about. And sometimes, as individuals, we see where priorities are, and we wonder, what are our governments doing? Because you say you don't have money to fund certain things in education or in health and so on, but we see other things we're not necessarily too happy about. So limited resources, insufficient funding for special education, and general education too. We're talking about teacher training gaps, where many educators lack specific training in inclusive practices and differentiated instruction. We're talking about social stigma, where we need to have campaigns to deal with persons understanding the different kinds of disabilities that we're talking about, which actually, when we're talking about exceptional needs, we're also talking about children who are gifted and talented. Yes, they too have special needs. Systems inflexibility, rigid curriculum structures and assessment methods that don't accommodate diverse learning styles. I've seen youngsters excel. They got a reader at CXC level, and they passed all their subjects. They're in university now, and they are doing well. How many students get that kind of accommodation? We're talking about advocacy here. You parents, you have a powerful voice to hold our governments to the word, to the law, to follow up. Your voice is important. Your persistence is important. And we have knowledge that we can create meaningful change. Now, I have the laws of many of our countries, all of our countries in the region. I'm just going to share 2 with you that coming out of Grenada, when they talk about identification, intervention, and placement, it says before determination is made under subsection 1 or 2, written consent of the parent must be obtained to an assessment of the child being undertaken. Assessment must, but hear the word now, if possible, be of a multidisciplinary basis. The results of the assessment reports must be provided and explained to the parent. The parent must be provided with information concerning the right of an appeal to the minister. It's there in black and white. How many of the parents in Grenada know that and hold the system to the word? The Cayman Islands, infrastructural provisions and support mechanisms. As per the Cayman Islands Disabilities Act in 2016, by the provision of auxiliary aids and services, including assisted devices, interpreters, technologies, and effective methods of making orally delivered and received materials available to a person with a disability, readers, taped audio, visually recorded text, and so on. It's there. Know your rights. Understand your rights when you have a child who has special education needs. Document everything. Keep detailed records of your child's needs and progress and lack thereof. Build relationships. Don't fight the system. Build relationships through your PTAs, through your teachers, through your principals, and so on, because we do have laws that support children with special education needs. One of the best I've seen, it comes out of Trinidad and Tobago, but it has been in draft for so many years that we wonder. It's one of the best written documents that I've seen in special ed. Yes, Guyana is doing really well now in terms of their legislation that they've come up with. Hold us responsible. We need to build support systems, family engagement, active family participation in educational planning and decision-making processes. Explain to your family members what is happening, and don't let them. I just heard a story of one of my colleagues where her child had a meltdown in a supermarket, and there comes this lady who was ready to give her advice, but her advice is not anything that's going to solve the problem. Boy needs some licks or something. Yes? She doesn't understand. And so we need to actively campaign to get others to understand what we mean when we talk about autism or dyslexia and so on. School leadership, we need our administrators on board. We need you to believe in these children and not just think that all you want in your school are children who you think are able. Never mind, some of them turn up with behavioral problems later on, which is a category of special needs. So you thought you got the very best because they passed a little reading test in grade 1. And by the way, we do not require grade 1 students to be readers in September of the year that they're entering school. If it happens, that's great. But the grade 1 curriculum is designed to build the reading skills. You come out of K ready to learn. Yeah? Policy support. Where the policy does not exist, we need to advocate. Professional development for our teachers or multidisciplinary staff members. We don't have too many speech and language pathologists. We have a serious challenge there in the region, and we have to get persons trained. Our community partners, they must also understand what is happening to our children and why we need them to be a part of the training. Sorry, I didn't move on. Yes, so family engagement, professional development, community partners, school leadership, policy support necessary. And so we go on now to what are the actions that you must take? What are your next steps? For parents, schedule a meeting with your child's teacher to discuss specific needs. Yes, don't wait on the teacher to call you in. You know, you're aware, have a discussion. Research local parent support groups and advocacy organizations. Document your child's strengths and challenges and learn about your educational rights and the available resources that are there and what else can you do. Engage with schools, attend meetings, review policies, advocate for resources, support inclusive practices at home and in the community. Because if you have 2 or 3 or 4 children at home, but your child with special needs is treated without a level of equity, then it's happening in the home, it's going to happen in the school too. So try to ensure that your children are treated as best as possible with some amount of equity. For school administrators, you have to be the enablers, the policy enablers. You have to ensure that funds are allocated to your school, set strategic priorities, approve policy changes, monitor implementation and implementation accountability, align school culture with stated advocacy goals. Throughout the region, you know who I have found to be the best advocates and supporters for children with special needs? The children themselves in general education classrooms. They want them in the classroom with them. They state it very clearly, and they assist the best way they know how. Yes? It's too much sometimes. They want to lift the children up if they can't walk. Yes? But we have to get them to understand that that's not their responsibility. For educators, create classrooms, environments that celebrate diversity. Adopt evidence-based approaches. provide professional development needs, model inclusive classrooms, and we have teachers all over the region that's modeling inclusive classrooms, differentiated instruction, and doing exceptionally well with all of their learners. Translate policy into practice, lead professional learning networks, champion equitable resources. And finally, for governments, ministries, departments, and agencies, you are the policymakers and the funders. Create and enforce laws to remove barriers and establish standards and maintain them. System-wide policy design and coordination necessary. Your responsibilities are to develop curricula, a tiered level curricula, assessment standards, and teacher qualifications, monitor schools, hold them accountable, and support capacity building for all learners. What we're aiming for, as we learned earlier, is to ensure that there is equity across the system and all of our learners are accommodated, whether they're in the hinterland of Guyana, they're in the remote rural parts of Jamaica with little access to transportation, yes? Or wherever they are, whatever their needs are, we have a responsibility to every single child. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give our presenters another round of applause. They did not disappoint. They did quite well on time and content, and I know that all of us are ready and raring to go as it relates to our questions that we might have for our esteemed panelists. So, as per usual, whenever you're ready, you get to the mic, please, and you identify yourself and the country you represent, and proceed to ask your questions. Panelists, you'll share the mic accordingly to respond.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Janelle Odo. I hold several hats. Attorney at law, I'm a national advocate for persons with disabilities here in Barbados on the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. I'm also the Secretary to the Caribbean Disability Network and advisor to the Caribbean Development Bank Future Leaders Network. Now, I can't begin to say how pleased I am with this discussion today. I was here and really agreeing with everything the panelists were saying, so thank you very much for your presentations. In my own experiences too, I know that what we really, really need in the Caribbean, inside and outside the schools, is more sensitivity training and awareness for sure. I was educated in the mainstream system for my secondary school education. I'm a blind student, but yet their idea of including me was giving me a classroom on the bottom floor and putting me to do music instead of home ec. That did nothing, actually, to my education because I still had to be up 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, brailing out notes as my parents read to me so I could be still on top of the class. So what we need is obviously more conversations with the students, with their parents, include us. We have that saying, nothing about us without us. And we have too many examples and circumstances in the Caribbean with people making decisions for persons with disabilities without including them. But my question here is now. So in my own personal experience too, a private organization had to step in and provide equipment for me to aid me in the classroom, over $20,000 worth of equipment. That was, including Braille embosser, a Braille display, PatMate, JAWS for the computer, which is a screen reading software, and all sorts of things. And up to this day, I'm still reminded, the amount of money could send school several children in Barbados? So my question is, we have the legislation in a lot of our territories. We have the policies. But yet the government is still saying we don't have the resources. How we could give something that we don't have? And even though we talk to them, we tell them, yeah, it's really needed, They're still saying, but we don't have it. How can we get them to allocate those resources still? One, and two, are there any best practices that we can learn from on how we can actually communicate with governments and try to get them to provide these resources and ideas, which I guess is the third question, ideas on how possibly we can minimize the costs but still have the highest inclusion, if even possible.
Thank you for that question. Dr. Hernandez?
Hello? Okay. Thank you for that. One of the things I find is that when we join our forces and we advocate, we make representation to our governments, and we talk about, I was speaking to a politician in Jamaica the other day, and I said to him, this is not dependent solely on the Ministry of Education. But my colleague in Ministry of Health might not want to let money go, and social services and so on. But one ministry cannot take it on. There are different ministries. Ministry of Health can do so much. Ministry of Social Services, all of these ministries, we have to advocate that there is a line item for students, for youngsters who need the help. And if we sit back and accept that this is the way things happen. The other day, a young lady, a little girl, she could not access her school. And so it was a headline in Jamaica that she couldn't climb the stairs because she had challenges walking. Immediately, the Ministry of Education stepped in, and she was placed in a school where she did not have that kind of challenge, and they paid for her. So we can find solutions if we sit and talk about it, if we have the advocacy going, but once we sit back and accept, well, if the private sector doesn't do this, or somebody, a family member doesn't do this, we now have shadows in our classroom, and that is as a result of advocacy, where a child needs help, the teacher in the classroom is unable to do all of that, so the ministry now pays for someone they call a shadow. I don't like the term, and we need to change it, but someone who goes into the classroom alongside the teacher and helps that child. So we have to get, and you see the PTA now, it is one thing that should be on the top of the list, yes? So to me, it's still about advocacy, about making, we have the right to change our governments, you know. And one of the things I don't like is when we start to talk too much about the same thing all the time. So we can't let up. We have to keep going. And you're a lawyer. You know what it takes, yes? Sometimes we might just have to do what we have to do, because if it is written in law that these things are to be provided. And one of the things, though, colleagues, have found is that nearly every one of the laws say may. When it comes to general education, there's no may be provided. But when it comes to special education, it says may. So we're advocating now for the may to be taken out. Yes? So hopefully that will happen soon.
In addition to that, so let me give you some specific examples. So I fully support everything Dr. Hernandez has said in terms of collaboration and advocacy. But let me give you a Guyanese example. So for the Early Childhood Center of Excellence, we have over 129 full-time students, full-time children at the early childhood level with some sort of neurodivergence. That's a lot of children who requires a lot of resources. So what we do in terms to get the resource, so we work with the Ministry of Education, and we lobby for the Ministry of Education Guyana to provide the resources that they have available for these children. And that engagement has been an ongoing discourse for the last 5 years, so until we got a commitment for the Ministry of Education to pay for 43 teaching support staff to support these students. So from that commitment, we did something in return for the Ministry of Education. The Early Childhood Center of Excellence facilitate training in inclusive pedagogy for practitioners at the early childhood level of practice. And we also develop a course in response to intervention for initial teacher training. So what we've been doing is a trade-off. You help us do our target, and we help you in return. And that engagement with the Ministry of Education has been going for the last 5 years, and we get the resource we want from them. For the Ministry of Health, we've done a research which talks about the pseudo-representation of autism spectrum characteristics in Guyanese children in urban parts of Guyana. So what we've seen in the last 10 years in the research data that we've gathered is that a significant proportion of children have been misdiagnosed as having autism spectrum disorder because they are presenting pseudo-symptoms, pseudo-characteristics, and because the assessment tools weren't designed for our sociocultural specificities, this misdiagnosis becomes a practice. So we started to correct these, and we present the data to the Ministry of Health Guyana. The Ministry of Health Guyana, through their disability unit, took the data and reanalyzed it and found exactly what we were trying to tell them for the last 3 years. And now, in order to get the action to continue from our side, they are giving us the resource we need for those children to get it done. Because we are nested on the campus of the University of Guyana, we get all the faculties to do the work. So the students in the various programs in the School of Medical Sciences, the speech and language therapists, the physiotherapists, all those related agencies, we do an agreement with them. Your students can come and do their practicum with us as long as they give so much hours of support to our children. So it is a constant bargaining for us. We don't do nothing for you unless you do something for us. And that is just the way it has to become in order for our children to get some support. At the center, we write for a lot of grants as well, but then it takes commitment and it takes a lot to work for these students. So currently we have 2 grants running. We have an Erasmus grant from the European Union of £60,000 to support children in that regards. But in turn, we have to facilitate 2 of their graduate students coming to study with us. It's always an exchange and a negotiation, and it takes time, it takes effort. But what we do as well, in addition to that, we work the PTA. And I'm sorry to say that, but we have a fully functioning PTA that we are allowed to work, and we work them. So we set targets for them in various areas, and not in terms of raising fund, but in terms of awareness to the private sector. And we are a part of the awareness team. So we do sensitization sessions at various expositions in Guyana. So there's Guy Expo coming up in November, and we're planning a booth for that. So we constantly put the information out there of what is happening, what you can do to support, how you can enable us, and how we can in turn give you some sort of agency to be an enabler and a supporter of the center and of children with disabilities across Guyana. So the bottom line is try to establish the collaboration, but ensure it's a mutual benefit and you get more for the children.
Right, thank you very much. And we have 3 minutes left, so we're going to have to speed up. Go ahead, Mr. Sharp, and then we have a student waiting.
Yes, Dr. Ashley, I see the passion in you like me. I'm on fire with this topic because championing the cause, I'm wearing 2 hats, the Caribbean Disability Network, but also I'm wearing my nonprofit organization based in Boston. And having the opportunity of working in the region with 8 Caribbean countries on these exact topics, and I want to ask some questions, 3 different areas: infrastructure, capacity building, and transitioning. When you spoke about the cultural pedagogy, and I see you in your slide, you looked at farming and showing various aspects. And just like me, you have, and Ms. Clarkson can talk about it because we worked with Nevis and St. Kitts with training and other stuff. While visiting a lot of the special needs schools, there were some schools, like for instance, St. Lucia has an amazing farming with their special needs schools. And one of the questions I want to ask you is in terms of, we talk about regional, but we're still working in silos. Why don't we expand these across the region? One of the things that we've done with the schools, we brought in computer coding, and you spoke about that. When we, just specifically for special needs kids, we did a pilot project with coding and animation and website. I must say, we have 1 child in Grenada who is now a website designer. So how do you see us expanding this regionally? Because we keep working in silos. So I want you to speak on that. I'm going to just do all the questions.
All right, so we have 2 minutes
Capacity
left.
building, training. How do we change the mindset of the teachers? Because some of them, they are training out there. We have given training. We gave 800s, just special needs. Also, how do we see the government? You spoke about investing in these areas. General teachers need training. In the room, I've been speaking to different islands about how we can expand general teachers training. Ms. Claxton, you know about it, neurodivergent training for dyslexia, autism, and ADHD that we have done. So how can we take it to another level? When we talk about the classroom, investing in sensory rooms, investing in, we have been donating. When we talk about partnership, this is where civil society comes in place. My organization has been supporting OECS countries with equipments, with toys, educational toys for those kids because they learn differently.
Yeah,
and
thank
last
you.
but least, how are we transitioning these kids? After they finish the school, they're just home sitting down. Higher education also for teachers in this field.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. And we'll take the young lady's contribution quickly because I don't want to leave the student out. Just make it very brief, please.
Let me just. All right, there we go. Hi, my name is Naomi Jordan. I'm a student of Harrison College, and as you can see, I'm currently still in the system. He would have touched on the point of training for teachers. And as someone who's experienced the different levels to teachers, I personally have a level to them. I have the person who is willing to cooperate and help, and then there's the person who's stuck in their ways. Now, I deal with a regular basis with both of them, and I just have this question for you, this one single question. What can be done, and even though I can see the fact that we're doing workshops, we're doing training, what is actually being done to change the stigma? Because we still have people who are going to be stuck in their ways, who are still in the educational system, teaching the exact same way how they taught 20 years ago. I wasn't alive 20 years ago. So why am I being taught the exact same way as someone who was born 20 years ago? So I know for a fact there are still teachers who would actually have this thing where they're like, they can't change. But if you can't change, why are you still teaching? So is there anything that there has to be some sort of repercussion in place that you have to complete this certain type of training? Doesn't matter how much you're into the schooling, doesn't matter how long you've been there, there has to be something that they have to complete, and if they don't pass it, well, you have to go through a board or something like that to get back into your training and back into teaching again. Because or not, I don't know how you can say that you're going to transform education if you can't transform the mindsets who are actually teaching us.
And this is one of the things I love about youth, because they often bring a question and they bring the answer, whether or not they realize it. And I think our young presenter has done a good job at that.
I'll quickly respond to her, and you guys can take on the other. You're speaking to the heart of what we really want to do in the region, which is to have our teachers licensed. In many of our countries, including Jamaica, once you have a degree or whatever it is that your minimum requirement is, you are that for life. Traditionally, there was no regulation that said you have to upgrade, you have to keep going to professional development training and so on. That is changing. And we have a fight throughout the region because a lot of teachers are set in their ways. But we are getting to the point where we're saying professional development is of importance and it must happen, and more we're seeing that happening. Also, in teachers' colleges, we have added more courses there to make them more aware of children with special needs so that they don't go out there teaching what we call using the one-size-fits-all approach. Some teachers, unfortunately, are still in that mode, and we have to keep working with them. But you are so correct. Too many of us are stuck in our ways, and we're doing the things that we learned to do many, many, many years ago that is not necessarily work. It didn't work back then. I can tell you that, because we had classrooms divided with what they called back then the bright side and the dun side. And those children did not get the same kind of education because somebody declared very early that they were slow, and these guys were getting ready to go to top high schools, and you were going to go into whatever. So you are one of our persons that must continue to advocate that our teachers must participate in professional development and to continue the journey and to recognize that one-size-fits-all approach cannot work, it has never worked, and it will never work. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Lashley. 30 seconds.
Just to complement what Dr. Hernandez has said, in Guyana only Monday, recently the Chief Education Officer sent out a mandate to all regional education officers for teachers within the region to be allowed to take individual courses on the special education needs program at the University of Guyana as part of their continuous professional development. So that's one way in which we are working towards ensuring our teachers across the region, even in the interland location, get that training, because we have satellite centers there now for them to have that training, and it's done totally sponsored by the government of Guyana through the Ministry of Education. So the teachers in that regards are getting that training. Now to come to you, sir. In terms of meeting the needs of all these students in the various cross-section, we had to have a whole cultural change in our approach to early childhood development. And we had to first get our parents on board to understand that when you send your child to school neatly dressed in the morning, going home back neatly dressed is not the hallmark of learning, it's not the hallmark of socialization, and it's not the hallmark of having a child with an impairment or any form of neurodivergence fully included. So once we got that out of the way, then we could have transitioned to getting our children into tilapia rearing. And these are neurodivergent early childhood children, or 4 and 5 year old, guided by the Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, get them into cauliflower farming. And what we found from this as well is that we had fewer occurrences of challenging behaviors, fewer autism tantrums, fewer manic episodes, fewer moments in which the children were over hyper. Because in the center of the center itself, play of words, we have what is called a biodiversity garden, in which any child with a neurodivergence in the middle of any learning session, any socialization, you feel sensory overload, emotional overload, negative interaction in the classroom or with the teacher, you can independently leave. The code is 2 tap on your desk. And if you can't 2 tap on your desk, when you pass in the door, 1 knock on the door. That is simply just to alert if the adults aren't watching. But we have somebody always in the garden for the entire day on a shift system monitoring. Now to answer about transition. We started to study the transition because 3 cohorts of children have left the center, and CDB officials here in the room can tell you for the last 5 years we've been clamoring with them, but Guyana has been reclassified as an high-income country, which puts us back at a setback. We've been clamoring with donors to get funding for a study into the progression of these children into the primary system, and to extend a primary support unit at the Early Childhood Center for their intervention. So it's still a work in progress. It's still something we're fighting for, and we are looking at it. But opportunities are there, and as God gave us the strength and the wisdom, we're going to continue to work. In terms of your collaboration and partnership, we're working with the Barbadian government in terms of their transforming education, and they are looking at what we've done in our center to give them ideas to improve and to better theirs, and then they're sharing their ideas with us as well so we can improve our practice. The same thing is being done now with Grenada. We are now in the explorative conversation stage, and we're going to extend that as far as possible. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And today's conversation reminds us that inclusion is not just about bringing children into existing spaces, it's about reshaping those spaces so that all children belong from the start. Together, educators and parents can be the advocates who turn inclusion into action. So let's go about breaking those barriers. Thank you.